Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation and ascension guide, and the originator of a practice called Trinity Energy Progression. And this week's Living the Shift. So this week we're talking about, I'm just putting up my phone here so I can see any comments. There we go. This week, I want to talk a little bit about certifications, and there's nothing wrong. And so here's the thing: there's no judgment. There's no right and wrong. It's just something to be really observant of, because as we go along, as we evolve, as we're changing, what's really important to remember is not to continue being stuck in the patterns and habits that we've been in the past. Because if we're creating a whole new timeline, we're creating a whole new creation here, right? And in doing so, in this evolution, is to really change the way we see things. So, for example, good morning, Laurel. So, for example, like a while back, I had this vision of, things shifting to a point where money stopped being currency and inner awareness became the currency, right? And think about that. Think about that for a minute. How that would change everybody if we did that. How that would change our. Good morning, Michelle. Very timely topic. Thanks. Yeah. So if we changed our whole way of doing things, right, and we created from anew, which is what we have the freedom to do in every moment, every day, right? And we do have this free, and now we even have bigger freedom. If you were listening to us talking to a couple weeks ago about changing and creating a new timeline and ending the old main one and all the other ones that had collapsed in and all that kind of stuff. Semantics, right? So if we're doing this differently, Gloria says, good morning, Angela. What a better way to start my 71st birthday than with you. I know, what a great pleasure for you to be here, Gloria. And I'm glad to be able to have the gift of you being here with us. So anyhow, so here's the thing. Think about this example, right? If we replaced currency with inner awareness as valued as what values us, or what values us in this society, how it would change the motivation of what everybody did, right? So that's part of like what it's important for us to shift our perspectives on right now, on how to create differently, how to move forward differently. So in the past, we put a lot of, for a very long time, we've put so much value and weight on how somebody thinks, and then it's become, over the years, how they've been educated, like where they went to school, what kind of degree they had, what kind of certifications they had, right? And it was like, oh, well, this person went here and whatever. And at the end of the day, it starts coming down to, really, you become connected with those who you resonate with or you need lessons from, right? And so, yes, there is a value to experience, right? But experience comes in so many different forms. And so what we do is we put all this value on things like that. Like, so in spirituality, what's really interesting is, so we were taking all that old pattern, we have been taking all that old pattern and bringing it into spirituality, thinking that was a pattern that somehow benefited us, which is a challenge, though, because as we're evolving faster and faster and changing faster and faster, we are, it's really challenging to hold up. So what's the thing, right? I think back in the, 1800s, there wasn't even such a thing as a medical degree, right? And so, or there was, but it was a really simple thing. And as it's gotten more and more complex as we've gone along. As things change, they're changing so quickly. It's a really challenging thing for us to try to keep up with it in, say, like 3D validations. Okay. And what I find is really interesting. So, for example, like those of us who do energy work and we know how to work, or we remember how to work with energy and we're practiced in it. We've been flexing that muscle. It's an easy thing for us. Find it interesting that science is sort of like running to catch up and trying to validate and certify and all that kind of stuff, because for like we have put this value on in our minds that that's what makes something valuable or legitimate, is if, in many cases, if science can prove it, right? Which is really interesting, because if you just think back to, 100 years ago, science would think that most of the things, what I'm doing right now, which is talking to you across an internet, across the globe, on video and on audio, would think that that was science fiction, right? Something that people could write about, but it would just, we didn't have the technology. But that wasn't science, right? Being able to see different dimensions, which they can now, wasn't science. So the funny thing is, at one point, the things that are science today and just really well accepted were things that were not being able to be documented yet, because our science, our mind analysis hadn't caught up to how to define it in this particular set of dimensions. So what's interesting is watching the awakening and our awakening of our consciousness and remembering of our abilities. Yeah, Sarah said you'd be a witch. Exactly, I'd be a witch. I am a witch. I always say, yeah, well, technically, I guess I am a witch in certain terms in certain periods of time, right? So, it's like, that's the joke we always say, is things like, oh, well, what sorcery is this, right? But we're really becoming very entrained again to listening to our inner voice and to work with energy. And energy is the entire multiverse. That is what it's all created from. And so it's like, so what we're doing is becoming very hyper aware and just able to accept our point, our piece as energy, as part of the whole, right? And to know how, in looking at that fluidity, how we work with it, how we can change it, how it best flows, how it holds us up, how it limits us, and how it helps us, right? How it can hurt our health and how it can help our health. And it's all like the energy and of separation and emotion and things that we hold and beliefs and all that kind of stuff. So the more we work in energy, right? Or I don't like to say work, the more we exist in the consciousness of being energy and knowing we create and manipulate through it in this multiverse, then the more we, the easier it becomes, right? And it becomes second nature. So what's really interesting is, it's like, I don't think about it, is it like documented? Is it, proven? I've worked with probably more than 1,000 people at this point in my career in doing this. I've been doing constant work with myself and seen my reality shift significantly over the past decade. And so I don't have any doubt. There's nothing that I need to went out and analyze. There's nothing I need to prove, nor do I feel like I need to have it prove, prove to somebody else, because I just see it happen all the time, right? And I've played with it, and I have trusted in it, and I have allowed it to be, right? And so that's how it has become. And so it's really interesting, is the things I know I take for granted in every day are things that some people like hear about and think that's like, phenomenal and miraculous and all that kind of stuff. So this is how our perspective goes, right? So let's get on to the, like in the topic of certifications and all that kind of stuff. With this consciousness of remembrance changing so quickly, we are still, like, the biggest thing for us to shift in many cases is to get our minds out of the way, to say, oh, well, I need to, what validates this? Like, what makes this real? Because the biggest learning curve that I experience when I'm helping others and when I teach Trinity and when I help others come into their own remembrance, right, is them getting out of their own way. Because the mind says, oh, and this was an example I was talking about with somebody just yesterday. Like there are many times I see somebody, they get guidance and they have a clear understanding of what to do, and they don't trust their own guidance. Well, the thing is, we're part of that wholeness. We are that wholeness, and we have the answers. It's a matter of like allowing ourselves to remember that through that fluidity and connection and constant practice of remembrance, right? So they get the answer and they're like, no, it couldn't be that easy, right? And so then they go and ask 5 of their friends or family, right? And they get their 5 cents. And then sometimes they go to a therapist, they'll go to maybe a psychic, or they'll go have some of their cards read or their palm read, or they'll have something from somebody outside of them read, so that, to validate, because they still don't trust, right? And then they go through all of this stuff, and then they take all these classes and they do all these kind of things. And I can't tell you how many times somebody's come back to me literally like a year, 2 years, 5 years later to tell me, and of course I don't remember this stuff because it's like I forget at the moment like often when we're done with what we're working on. And they'll come back and be like, well, you told me, like that I was right about this, that this is the guidance and whatever. And you were right that I was right. But I had to go through all this stuff to get to that point of realizing that I was correct. And I'm like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's our minds. The biggest learning curve that we have is getting our minds out of the way, right? So Sue says, having worked in the scientific world for years, learning that validation and certification wasn't needed. The energy was just there. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. So the most basic thing for us, right? And I can talk as woo as you want. I can talk, all kinds of dimensional stuff. I can talk all kinds of quantum physics. I can talk all kinds of, guides and gods and goddesses and, however you wanted to package it, right? But at the end of the day, the focus is to come back to trusting that you have all the answers. You already have them. There's no separation with us and the rest of the universe. There was a church somebody told me about that had been created a long time ago, and it's not Scientology. It was like called the Church of Science or something like that, where they looked at everything as like the atoms and molecules that it was. And when you do that, you can't see the separation like between me and the desk and the chair and the air around me, because it's just an interaction, right, of this energy. And I look at it in a slightly different way, but it's sort of like I talk to people like, well, our cells all have consciousness of their own, right? And then they know what to do, and they take, part of the organs, and the organs know what to do. And then the organs, create the body. And then we have the mind control center here in the 3D of that, the lessons of the mind and separation. But then it gets concentric. Then we're a part of a collective, and the collective is a part of collective, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's all part of this one divine consciousness. And so we're so used to, though, in this perception of separation in our physical bodies, this piece of our consciousness, and we forget that we feel like, part of the lessons have been, creating the perception that we have to learn, that we have to get the answers from someplace else, from something else, that something else is far sexier in giving me the answers than my own guidance, right? So it's so much sexier to say, oh, I went to this channeler who channeled this, or this person, I went to this, I asked this person and this is what they told me. And I'm just like, well, so what do you get? Right. And then people balk when I ask that, no matter how practiced they are. Often they will say, well, I sort of got this. Okay. Well, did you check in that it was your ego, that it wasn't your ego? Did you check in on this and this and this? So here's the thing. So we get into this whole thing of, well, who certified you? Right. And this is really sort of what's driving this, but it's all interrelated. We get into this place of who certified this person, right? Or how valid is their perception because of what they've been certified by. Well, the funniest thing is, so we've tried to transfer that over into the metaphysical and energetic and spiritual field. And it's like, well, we're remembering things and how to do things, and it's so very individual. It's happening so quickly. It's like, well, how do you validate, right? Or invalidate the validity of somebody's experience or perception. So it's changing our perception to say either it resonates with me or it doesn't. Okay. And when we turn it around, we commit to ourselves and say, I commit to remembering. I commit to not learning, but to remembering the knowledge of the divine consciousness. I commit to remembering my enlightenment, to remembering my ascension, to remembering my wholeness. And in that, I align all my energy to embodying that. Okay. And when we do everything to commit that to ourselves, because that's what we owe to ourselves, then everything will align and things will show up. And then we look at things differently. It's not, well, what certifications do you have? Or you're better or more knowledgeable, whatever, because of certifications you have or classes that you take. It is, does your commitment to your remembrance resonate with me? And does your remembrance resonate with my truth as well? It's a very different way of looking at how we perceive and experience others who are doing, these things. So the other point on this has to do with what I call seeking addiction, right? And it's so funny because there are a lot of times you come to these circles, right? And people are talking, they're like, well, I'm a spiritual seeker. And they wear it on their arm like a badge. And they've taken, a plethora of classes, all kinds of certifications, all kinds of different like practices and whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is it then becomes part of the ego of, well, look at how important I am. Look at how versed I am in this. That means I'm better than you. And it's funny to see that going, and it's an implied thing. I see it all the time. Or I'm not as good as this person. The other side of this, I'm not as good as this person because they have all of these certifications, right? So what's interesting is there are so many people I've worked with in Trinity when they've taken the class, become practitioners. And I have taught other practices and stuff as well in the past. I actually have a whole bunch of certifications and different practices and things like that I don't even talk about because it wasn't for me proving myself to anybody else. It was for me exploring who I am. And so, the whole purpose in Trinity is for everyone to explore who you are, but to remember and to stand in that power and to do it without the need of externalization, external tools, external things, practices and labels and, kinds of, frequencies and all that kind of stuff, because we can access all of it. So at some point, and I say this over and over again, at some point, the importance, the thing of utmost importance is for us to get to the point of realizing I need nothing outside of me. I don't need classes. I don't need books. I don't need seminars. I don't need tools. I don't need crystals. I don't need, cards. I don't need other people to tell me what they're getting. And my guidance can be different from what they're getting, and that's okay. And it's not that one of us is wrong. It's that we just have different guidance on the different, and we translate it different through our filters. Okay. But we hide behind. So what happens is the spiritual seeking addiction is when we are we believe that the action of actually taking the classes or reading the books or using the tools makes us better spiritually than if we don't have all that, right? And that I'm not good enough. I'm still not good enough, right? The implication is I'm still not good enough because I still have to take more classes, I have to read more books. Now, if we're doing it again for just self-exploration and you're guided to, great, because a lot of times it just helps you to remember as a message of things that you might not yet have remembered. And then you can take it to yourself and take it in your own practice and take it in how you express and embody your divine self and make it your own. That's great. I've like I said, I did take a whole bunch of classes early on. And Sarah says we've created enough mirrors and triggers to and others. Not sure. I don't understand what that means. We've created enough mirrors and triggers. Well, yeah, and others, period. Like I think that's what you're saying, that we, we are just everything. And when we start to realize that everything is a message of remembrance, a message to trigger remembrance within us, around us, every interaction, everything we see, do, touch, everybody we speak to, every experience we have, then we accept it all as equal in terms of triggers to help us remember, right? And so the key, though, is to realize when we're addicted to seeking. Yeah, we don't need classes to progress. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. That's what I thought you were saying. We don't need the classes to progress. We don't need the books, and we don't need the tools. And again, like I said, so here's the funny thing. People ask me all the time, oh, have you read this book by this person? And it's not that they're not great books. And it's great. It's funny because I'm now in the middle of writing my own books and whatever. And I fought that for a really long time because I'm like, well, why do we need books? Because I sort of really have gotten into that place of, yeah, I just go inside and get the answer. And I set myself to have that conscious clarity. And it comes to me in some kind of cornucopia of different, messages and like insights and downloads, however you want to call it, and just openings. And so, there are many, so anyway, so in teaching Trinity, I was talking about like how a part of the goal is to help everyone to really become what I call independent, right? Dependent on your own guidance, dependent on what's inside of you, instead of like having to use something outside to access a certain frequency, to know you are the frequency, right? To know that you are the frequencies and you can access all the frequencies. And what prevents us from doing that are the partitions and beliefs that we hold in place that cause us to limit ourselves. So if we took all the energy instead of so if we put all this energy to taking all these classes because we think we're still not good enough, right? Or that we're still not, I don't want to say smart enough, but I'm talking about still not like insightful enough or intuitive enough or know enough or whatever, it still perpetuates that egoic idea of lack if we're doing it for that purpose, right? Which 9 times out of 10, many are. Because you hear it used in conversation. Oh, well, yeah, I took this class taught by this person, like it's a badge of honor, and it's like, okay, great. But anyway, so people ask me, did you read this book? Have you taken this class? And I'm like, well, no, or yes, sometimes, but most often it's no, unless I'm guided. And usually there's a thing. I've put it out there. It's like, well, if I would say like a book comes up 3 times in like a week or something like that, I'm like, oh, there's something in there to look at. Now, here's the funny part. Not necessarily read the whole thing. Sometimes it's literally to read one chapter, like one sentence, literally, like, and I'll just ask before I even open the book, to have the reminder that's important. Sometimes I'll read half a book and be like, yep, got everything I needed. Sometimes I read one chapter. And then I'll go and say, oh, what a great book, because, that actually gave me this great answer of remembrance that I had been like creating for myself. So when we start looking at things that way, it stops putting this hierarchy of importance on, like how important it is to have all these certifications. Because by the way, with these different individual remembrances, and what I call them as different flavors of ice cream, with them coming up so much today, Michelle says, I totally know what you mean about the one chapter, one sentence thing about books. That's how it happens for me too. Yeah. And when you can trust, and it's like, and then you say, oh, you don't say, well, what a waste. It's like, oh, well, look at that gem that I found. And I didn't have to read through the whole thing. And it's great that the whole thing is there for those who need that whole thing. I just needed that one little thing, that one sentence or that one paragraph or that one chapter that helped me to spur on an understanding, a remembrance that I had yet to uncover within myself. So, when we start looking at everything that way, then we stop like putting all this energy to having to prove ourselves, right? And I've worked with people who've taken Trinity to like who wanted to start doing energy work with people professionally, and the biggest challenges, especially if they haven't taken a whole bunch of other kinds of energy classes and whatever. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Some of the most powerful. It was interesting. I had a meetup that I held for a little while, and it was an open energy meditation meetup. And I think did it for like 4 months. The first 2 months, I had a lot of people show up, and we would do a guided meditation together. I would just sort of go through a meditation that I was guided to do. And then we would break off into pairs, and just, it was like, okay, whatever, say like energy modality or practice you would like to do and helping and working together in a session with each other, then use it. And I stopped it after like 3 or 4 months because I had so many people like stop coming because they were like making all these fear-based comments of, oh, well, I just don't like working with somebody who has that kind of practice, or who doesn't have this kind of certification, or somebody who, because there were people who came who had no certifications or classes. And I will tell you what, I would purposely go out of my way to work with them one-on-one, because those were some of the most powerful sessions I experienced, because they had no biases, they had no limitations, and they were just guided on what to do. And those are phenomenal, right? So part of what it's important for us to do is get past the rituals and limitations and all the structure that we have to have, and you have to do this and you can't do that and you mustn't do this. And part of that getting out of our own way is to know, I already have all this. I already have the access to it. Gloria says, the books and classes have provided me a background. Some I really needed to learn and some discarded. I understand what you're saying about trusting yourself and what you feel. Yeah. And it's funny, culturally, then we have created this whole hierarchy within the spiritual realm of, oh, well, this person took this class, or this is this practice and this is that. And it's really interesting because it's whatever you're guided. If you go by guidance, it will never steer you wrong. Okay. If you go by ego, you're going to waste a whole lot of time and money. There's a big difference. You can waste a lot of time and money. And actually, there's nothing wasted. There's no mistakes. It's just a big lesson that you had to learn through using up a whole lot of time and money that could have been done a whole lot more efficiently, So like there are times, and I'll tell you what, there are times where I look at things, these insights, understandings that I get, and I like sort of smack myself in the head. I should have had a V8. How did I not see this before? But really the answer was, well, because all these layers of understanding and remembrance were to open up within me for me to be able to see this thing that's been staring me in the face, because I just didn't even know how to see it before, right? And the commitment I've made to myself from the very beginning that I was guided to is commit to remembering, commit to that power within me, and know that nobody can tell me how to use it. Nobody can tell me, nobody can nobody can give me something I don't already have the ability to access myself. I don't have to I don't have to have, what do they call them? Oh, I forget what they call them. It's been so long since I've been in classes like this. Like when you take Reiki, you have this little ceremony and opening or whatever. Like, you don't have to have that. Many, like I said, there are many who have had no training whatsoever. And in my class, in the classes that I teach, in the training classes and whatever, it's really just the holding the vibration that helps those who are vibrating, being held in that vibration and agreed to stay in that vibration, opening to remembrance of accessing that power of wholeness and the whole spectrum of frequency within themselves without having to use anything externally, without having to use any tools outside of them. So it becomes so much more efficient to commit ourselves energetically to knowing we have the answers, and to committing ourselves to acceptance and wholeness, to creating that remembrance within ourselves. Because if we put all our energy to that, how fast we progress. I have so many people who say to me, oh, I wish I had the insights that you do. I wish I could see things like you do. I wish I could understand the way you do. And I'm like, you can. Commit to yourself. You have that ability. You have that inside of you. It's all inside of us because we're all the same, by the way. And we're all the same divine consciousness. We're just different embodiments and expressions and facets of that. And that's the beauty of being both that, like, embodied as individuals and all these different levels of consciousness, and being whole, which is interesting because today I didn't even connect that until this moment. That's what I put out for my gratitude, because I'm doing this month of gratitude thing since it's the month of Thanksgiving in the US. And today was like about having gratitude for having individuality as well as oneness simultaneously. And that's really, that's the beauty of it. And we get to, and I call it, it's all different flavors of ice cream. We're all different flavors of ice cream, and we're still ice cream, right? Which to me is like the best because it's like my favorite dessert. But another thing is, this whole, if you want to look at it in frequency only, right? This whole multiverse is created in frequency. Energy and frequency, all the same kind of thing. And the way I sort of see it, some people talk about the music of the spheres or whatever. I just see it as one multiversal symphony of incredible beauty and beyond words, extraordinary. So each embodiment, each individualization, each facet that we have created as the divine consciousness into individuals is infinitely beautiful and infinitely perfect. And we're all like, because it's all us. It's like, think about the 2 to 3 trillion cells in your body. That's still part of you. And yet they're all individual for whatever purpose and have a consciousness of their own. And they create the organs, and the organs create, it's just beautiful. And in this multiverse of separation we have created, in this symphony, everything has its perfect note. And that perfect note is exactly why your physicality exists. And we knew it. And that's what we created, because that's the stuff we're. And if we look at it in frequency, that's really what it is. And if you think about that, it's like, who are you to not be your fulfilled, fully embodied note? You are fully able and divine, and it's a matter of you accessing that flavor of ice cream of your own. And the commitment, and the way we get to it in the fastest way, is that commitment to that independence, to that trust, and listening to that guidance, and then working our power, our divine power, from there. And then we realize that we're all equally incredible and equally divine and equally infinite. So with that, look at that this week. Look at where you're still having bias because you're not feeling worthy because you haven't had enough classes, or you feel like one person is more important than another because they haven't had enough classes. Or, I mean, there are some people that you meet and you've known them in your life that you just like, oh, wow, they just got this, like that, right? They got this, but you have it too, right? They're just a reminder of stuff that you've yet to remember. And so be grateful for them. Be grateful for yourself and being the divine, and that we've faceted ourselves in this beautiful, incredible, phenomenal way. And then take ownership of the fact that you have this inside of you. And take commitment to accessing that, free of the dependence on things outside of us. On that, have a great week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing out with this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.